Kosher Organic Ranchero with your host, Yo Menu. Now today, we are going to make a remarkable dish. It's going to be a Boston cream pie with our scientific baking enthusiast, Tzipora. We're going to be using the Strauss Family Creamery whipped cream and European style butter. So we're going to show you how to make something remarkable with them. So let's get cracking. Welcome back to the Kosher Organic Ranchero, and now may I introduce Tzipora, our scientific baking enthusiast. Now, Tzipora is going to introduce to us the way in which we can learn about the science behind and underlying the Boston cream pie. Take it away, Tzipora.
Thank you.
So tell me, what are we going to be doing today?
Today, I'm going to make a Boston cream pie. Now, that's not actually a pie. It is a sponge cake, a double layer sponge cake with custard that goes in the middle and then chocolate that is glazed over the top. Well, first we're going to be making the sponge cake of the Boston cream pie. We have two cake pans here because we're making 2 layers, and it's a springform baking pan of 9-inch diameter, and we have parchment lining the bottom. You can put butter on the bottom and also along the sides of the baking pan, and then you dust it with flour, and the flour sticks to the butter, and that creates a layer separating the cake batter from the baking pan, and then the cake will come off cleanly and smoothly and without sticking or breaking.
This butter over here, is at room temperature?
Yes, this butter we're going to use to cream with the sugar, so we have it at room temperature. It's been sitting out for a little bit, and it will cream together with the sugar quite nicely.
Marvelous.
The purpose of the ingredient of the sugar is mostly for taste. The butter, however, is used to create a hydrophobic layer around the starch granules inside the flour. That way, the water and the liquid can't get inside the starch granules of the flour and create gluten. We want to minimize the amount of gluten created in the batter, because the more gluten strands that are created between starch granules, the stretchier and tougher the batter will be. And we want to keep it as light and fluffy as possible. Okay, so now we're going to be taking the room temperature butter and we're going to be dropping it into the mixture. For this, we're using about 200 grams of unsalted butter, and that's about 14 tablespoons. We're going to be using these 2 extra tablespoons in the custard, so we can save that for later.
How do you decide whether to use weight or volume when you measure?
The reason we are using grams for these measurements is because a cup of flour is not the equivalent of a cup of sugar, because their densities are different. So if you use 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of sugar, that's standardized, and that creates a perfect ratio between the ingredients. So we need 200 grams of sugar for this. That's about a cup of sugar. And
200 grams exactly. What an excellent scientific baking enthusiast.
Thank you. Now we've poured in the 200 grams of sugar with the butter, and we're going to be creaming them together until it's nice and smooth. Always remember to use a spatula to scrape down the sides of the mixture so that you can get everything together and it's a smooth, even consistency. So the next thing we're going to do is add the eggs to the sugar and butter mixture.
For this remarkable Boston cream pie, we're using the green Araucana eggs that come from the Rancho. They have a remarkable yellow yolk that you'll see in a moment.
Before we add the eggs to the butter and sugar mixture, we want to put them in a bowl of warm water. That will bring them to room temperature. The reason we do this is because the protein in the egg whites becomes warmer and it's easier for it to capture air. And the whole thing about cake is, remember, capturing air. That will make a better cake. And before we do that, we are going to kosher them and make sure that there are no blood spots on the yolk. And we check that there are no blood spots. And we also admire how deep yellow those yolks are. And I like to, before I add the egg, I just poke a hole in the yolk so that it's able to break and mix into the butter a little easier. I drop it and put it on a medium setting. So the next step is to measure out the flour, and this is going to be 200 grams of flour as well. See, the thing about measuring in grams, which makes it easier, is it's 200 grams of flour, 200 grams of sugar, and 200 grams of butter. So it's a pretty easy recipe to remember as long as you're going with grams. And next, we're going to want to sift together flour, baking powder, and salt. 200 grams of flour is also about equivalent to a cup and a half of flour, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So now this is the most important ingredient, and what happens is when the baking powder comes in contact with liquid, the salts inside the baking powder turn into acid, and the acid reacts with the potassium bicarbonate. That produces carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide lifts the cake and fills it with bubbles that cause the cake to rise. Our next step is to add the flour mixture to the butter mixture. We want to do that gradually and at a slow speed so that it doesn't create any clumps inside the mixture. So now we are adding about 2 tablespoons of the Strauss Family Creamery milk. So this is a little bit of a non-scientific secret, but I like to use the butter wrappers to grease the pan because there's still a lot of good butter on those wrappers and we want to use as much as we can without wasting. So we grease up the 2 pans and then we'll dust it with flour.
Boy, this looks incredibly fluffy.
I am so excited to eat this. Now this batter is a little thicker than some batters, and it doesn't pour directly into the cake pan, but that's all right. You can just use a rubber spatula to smooth it out and make it look nice and pretty. And now we're going to be putting the 2 cakes into the oven for about 18 to 20 minutes. We're going to be setting our timer for about 20 minutes. Pretty good. Okay, as soon as the cakes come out of the oven, you gotta drop them, and I'll explain later. Ready? And the second one. There you go.
What was that?
Let me explain. As you can see behind me, there's a diagram that explains what happens if you do drop the cake and if you don't drop the cake. You see, when the cake is in the oven, steam is created from the carbon dioxide. When the cake comes out of the oven, the bubbles of the sponge cake are filled with hot steam. What happens if you don't drop the cake is the steam inside the bubbles will condense and what happens is the bubbles get smaller and the cake collapses because it doesn't have anything to support itself. But if you drop the cake, a shockwave is sent from the bottom to the top of the cake, and it breaks some of the walls of the bubbles and allows air to flow in and support the cake and keep it light and moist.
I see. Amazing.
Well, now that we've dropped the cakes, we're going to let them sit and cool for about 20 minutes or half an hour before we take them out of the cake pan. So now the next step is going to be making the custard. So the ingredients for the custard will be 2 cups of milk, a teaspoon of vanilla, 2 tablespoons of butter, a 1/3 cup of cornstarch, 3 eggs, and 1/4 cup of sugar, and 1/3 cup of sugar. Okay, so for this step, we are going to make the egg mixture of the custard. So we are going to have 2 egg yolks and 1 full egg. So now I'm going to separate the eggs. And I can see while separating it that it's nice and clean and there are no blood spots. So we separate the eggs because for this recipe we need 2 egg yolks and 1 full egg. The reason for that is a lot of the protein is in the egg yolk, and custard is all about the protein of the eggs. And you whisk those together. Okay. Next, we are going to stir together the 1/3 cup of sugar with the 1/3 cup of cornstarch. So now we're going to pour the sugar cornstarch mixture into the eggs and whisk that together. The purpose of cornstarch is to thicken things, and custard, the whole point of custard is you want it to be thick and creamy. And next we'll make a milk and sugar mixture that we'll bring to a boil, and then we'll mix these 2 together. So now the first thing we're going to do is to pour the milk into the saucepan before we put it onto the heat. And then we are going to add 1/4 cup of sugar and stir that together. So now we're going to move the milk over to the stove so that we can bring it to a boil. So now the milk has come to a boil. You can see the bubbles of air escaping from the top. And we're going to scoop a little bit of it out. And bring it over to our egg mixture. And now we're going to pour the hot milk into the egg mixture very slowly so that nothing cooks too quickly. And then we bring the egg mixture and we put it back into the milk. And the reason we do that instead of just putting the egg mixture into the milk is to raise the temperature of the eggs so that they don't cook instantly if we were to put them into the boiling milk. If they were to cook instantly, we would have soggy scrambled eggs. And to prevent that, we raise the temperature of the egg mixture and then we put it back into the milk so that it creates a smooth, consistent heating and denaturing of the egg proteins. And now we can bring it over and pour it into our milk mixture. And now you can see it's that nice cream color of custard that we were looking for. At this point, you want to be sure to constantly stir it so that no lumps form, because it's going to cook really quickly and you don't want your custard to have any lumps. Oh, look, it's so yummy.
how do you know when the custard is done? Tell me what we're looking for here.
To test that it's the proper thickness and consistency, you can dip a wooden spoon into it, and if you draw a line down the back, the line will hold its shape, and that's how you know it's ready. Here. The next step is to mix in our butter. Since it's so hot, the butter will melt pretty quickly. In this mixture, the butter is mainly to taste, to make it a little bit creamier. So now we're going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla into our custard mixture. It will add to the flavor of the custard. So now, this custard is good and ready, but it has to cool down before we can use it on the cake. So we'll pour it into this bowl. Also be sure to cover the top of it with cellophane so that a skin on the top of the custard doesn't form from cooling down too quickly. And we're ready to start our chocolate glaze. I've used a lot of heavy whipping cream. This is the one to use. Okay, so we'll be using 1/2 cup of the heavy whipping cream, 4 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate, a tablespoon of butter, and 2 tablespoons of sugar. So we will take the 4 ounces of chocolate and break it up. The reason for that is chocolate is very, very sensitive to heat, and if you heat it up too quickly with the heat being too direct, it will burn the chocolate. So one way to melt chocolate is to use a double boiler, and that's when you put a bowl of water on the stove, and then you put the bowl of chocolate over the bowl of water, and the steam from the water creates an even distribution of heat, which slowly melts the chocolate as opposed to burning it. So instead of doing that, we're heating up milk, and then we'll pour it over the chocolate, and that will also distribute the heat very evenly over the chocolate and melt it quickly. There we go. So we'll set that aside, and we'll bring heavy cream and the sugar and butter to a boil. So now that we've brought the mixture of heavy cream and butter and sugar to a boil, we're going to bring it right over and pour it directly over the chocolate. And then we quickly, while the heat is still there, stir it together, and it should form a nice, smooth glaze. Ooh, look at that. Perfect. So now we can set that aside.
Do we just eat everything in a 3-course meal of custard, cake, and chocolate?
Well, no, not yet. We have patience when putting together our science experiments. And the first thing we'll do is to pop open the pans on the cake. We'll have that.
Perfect. I will do the honors on this one.
Please. And as we're doing that, I will begin our custard schmear. Ooh, look at that. So we just put a nice thick layer of custard between the two. You can even have it come over the sides a little bit. Perfect. Look at that. That's just beautiful. And last, but definitely not least, we have our chocolate glaze. Isn't that just beautiful? And as you can see, we've just about finished this magnificent and rather delicious looking piece of scientific engineering.
a scientific baking enthusiast's chef-d'oeuvre. Beautiful.
Oh. The experiment is a success. Have some Boston cream pie. So good.